Hello friends, in this video I will be discuss the main organs of the United Nations. I will be also discuss some specialized agencies of the United Nations. I will also discuss here what are the functions of the United Nations in post-Cold War era. I will also discuss here why the United Nations is failed. I also will tell you what are the future of the United Nations and how we can improve to the United Nations, and I will also discuss many more topics on United Nations here to help to improve yourself or to get knowledge about United Nations. So start first discuss the introduction of United Nations. The United Nations represents mankind's latest and only partially successful attempt to ascertain some mechanism for world peace and stability. Mankind as a whole has never been despair of attaining universal peace and effort by well-meaning persons. And nations, a group of nations, have continued to be made. It is an interesting phenomenon that such momentous efforts have been made usually after some catastrophic events. After the First World War, the League of Nations came into existence with a maximum membership of 59 states. However, it remains predominantly a European organization which made some progress in economic and social fields. Therefore, it was considered to fail as the Second World War broke out, which it had no power to prevent. Apart from the very human desire for peace, the concept of United Nations arose out of the vision of the Allied powers in the Second World War, who wished to see some other emerged from the choice of the catastrophic war, visualizing for themselves, of course, a position of dominance. In 1941, the Western Allies is consulted against Hitler Germany, starting calling themselves the United Nations. The Moscow Declaration of 1943 stressed the necessity of establishing an international organization for peace and stability. Definite plans were made in stages at Tehran in 1943. 50 nations sent the representative to San Francisco Conference in 1945, which drafted the charter. It formally came into existence on 24th October 1945. The United Nations can be best defined as an association of states which have pledged themselves by signing the charter to maintain world peace and to cooperate in creating such conditions under which peace and security can be achieved. The charter, however, does not authorize the organization to intervene in domestic affairs of the state. A charter is essentially a multilateral treaty among several sovereign nations, establishing a system of collective security and providing various ways of cooperation between the states. It embraces all the three fields in which nations can cooperate politically, economically, and culturally. Mutual discussions and interminable debates are the recognized modes of achieving this cooperation at international level. There is a provision for sanctions against those member states who violate the United Nations decision, but this depends on the cooperation of the members and particularly the delinquent members. Indeed, some member states have precedently ignored the plea of the United Nations and carry on with their own policies. Israel and India are examples of this. Before attempting an evaluation of the United Nations, it would be appropriate to take into account the detail of the structure and methods of working of its principal organs, and to assess their impact on the policies that have emerged from the debates. Only then will it be possible to draw a balance sheet. So there are some organs of the United Nations. The first one is the Security Council. The Security Council is one of the most important and principal organs of the United Nations. Since the United Nations organization is a vast one having a large number of nations or members, it was imperative that a small council with sufficient executive authority should be created which should be able to take decisions quickly and effectively for the maintenance of international peace and security. The Security Council consists of 15 members, of which 5 are permanent. These permanent members are China, France, Russia, UK, and USA. These 5 permanent members enjoy the right of veto. Security Council has the powers to establish subsidiary bodies as need for the performance of its functions. Therefore, it has established major 7 committees which are working with their subsidiary committees on a specific issue of the world's politics. These committees are counterterrorism and non-proliferation committees, military staff committees, sanction committees, standing committees, and ad hoc bodies. Peacekeeping operations, international tribunal, and advisory subsidiary body. In the original concept of the United Nations, it was envisaged that the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security would fall on these big powers of the world. But with the change in the power status of UK and France and the rise of conflict between USA and USSR immediately after Second World War, the situations worsened. Since then, the veto power has been the greatest stumbling block in the way of international peace. The 10 other members of the Security Council, called the non-permanent members, are elected for the 2-year terms by the General Assembly and No member nation is elected for the 2 consecutive terms. For a non-permanent members nations to come on the Security Council, a 2/3 majority vote in a General Assembly is required. Generally, various geographic regions are given representation in the election of non-permanent members to the Security Council. While dealing with international disputes, the Security Council either tries to arrive at a peaceful settlement or it uses its power to take enforcement action by means of sanctions against the defaulting members. The usual method is that after the case is referred to the Security Council either by the General Assembly, the Secretary General, or by nation. The Council first admits the case by the majority decision and then invites the parties for discussion. Then a resolution is passed giving the line of action. No resolution can be passed without the consent of the 5 permanent members because they have the veto right. The Security Council has the power to determine whether there has occurred a threat to breach of peace or an act of aggression has been committed. The sanctions which can be imposed are both economic as well as those involving the use of armed forces. During the history, the United Nations has faced many crises, but only in few cases it has been able to take any corrective action. The formation of the United Nations Armed Forces for Action in Korea could be done only when one of the great powers, the USSR, was absent at the meeting and therefore could not exercise its veto. The Security Council passed 3 important resolutions in 1960 on the Congo crisis, providing for military assistance to the government of Congo against the rebel regime. But after a successful start, the unanimity of the opinion among the big powers did not last and the measures adopted could be completely successful. The Security Council functions continuously. Each member nation has a permanent representative at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. The Security Council also approves the admissions of the new members to the organization. Another interesting feature of the Security Council is that the veto does not operate on the questions of procedure. All disputes can be discussed, but before the Council can start taking any action, the consent of the permanent members as well as that of the majority of the Council is required. The abolition of the right of the veto enjoyed by the 5 permanent members has been advocated by many scholars. It is impossible for such a step to be undertaken for the time being is a symptom of the frantic struggle for votes influenced by big powers. Recently, Security Council welcomed the signing of an agreement between anti- and pro-government forces in South Sudan. In 2014, United Nations Security Council election was held during the 69th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The election were for 5 non-permanent seats for 2 years, mandates commencing on 1st January 2015. In accordance with the Council rotation rules, whereby the 10 non-permanent United Nations Security Council seats rotate among the various regional blocs into which United Nations members states traditionally divided themselves for the voting and representation purposes. The 5 available seats were allocated as follows: 1 for Africa, 1 for the Asia-Pacific group, 1 for Latin America and the Caribbean, 2 for the Western Europe and other groups. The 5 members are serving on the Security Council for the 2015 to 2016 period. The countries elected were Angola, Malaysia, New Zealand, Spain, and Venezuela. Now I tell you about what is the General Assembly. The General Assembly, represents by all 193 member states of the United Nations, meets once a year in regular sessions, but special meeting can be called anytime. Under the terms of the Charter, the main responsibility for arriving at decisions and making appropriate recommendation to the General Assembly rests with the Security Council. But because of the addition of the new Asian and African members, the General Assembly has come to assume a very important role. One of the main functions of the General Assembly is to elect representatives to its various organs, such as the Security Council, Trusteeship Council, the Economic and Social Council, and International Court of Justice. The business before the General Assembly is divided into 2 important matters. Important matters include election to other organs and matter of concern for vote peace, and are decided by a 2/3 majority of the number of members voting. To deal with the issue of General Assembly's limited authority, a resolution called Uniting for Peace Resolution 1950 was passed during the Korean War debate, in which a convention has been established that is the event of Security Council failing to decide a problem concerning threat to peace because of the use of or threat of the use of veto by a big power. The matter could be considered by the Assembly. The General Assembly could therefore pass a resolution recommending certain lines of action for execution by its members. This happened during the Anglo-French attacks on Egypt. When France vetoes, the matter was referred to the General Assembly, which through a resolution condemned the attack on Egypt. In spite of this, the fact remains that it is a Security Council which takes major decisions, and the solution of the General Assembly are only recommendation of the member states. With a large number of small states, the use of normal forces has been very prominent during recent years by African and Asian member nations in the debates of the General Assembly. The General Assembly has many committees through which its work is carried out. There is a General Committee, the Credential Committee, Investment Committee, Committee for Program and Coordination, Committee on Conferences, Committee on Information, Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian people, Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, United Nations Specific Committee on the Effect of the Atomic Radiation, the Committee on Financial Contribution, and the Administrative and Budgetary Standing Committee. Apart from these procedural committees, there are other committees known as the ad hoc committees, such as Ad hoc Committee on Administration of Justice at the United Nations, Ad hoc Committee on the Criminal Accountability of the United Nations officials and experts on mission, Ad hoc Committee of the General Assembly for the announcement of voluntary contributions to the program of the United Nations, High Commissioner for Refugees, Ad hoc Committee of the General Assembly for the announcement of voluntary contribution on the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, Ad hoc Committee on a comprehensive and integral international Convention on Protection and Promotion of the Rights and Dignity of Persons with Disabilities, Ad hoc Committee on the Elaboration of Convention Against Corruption, Ad hoc Committee on the Indian Ocean, and Ad hoc Committee on the Scope of Legal Protection under the Convention on the Safety of the United Nations and Associated Personnel. These committees deal different issues that remain prominent in international discussions. There are 3 advisory committees working under the General Assembly, which are Advisory Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Questions, Advisory Committee on the United Nations Program of Assistance in the Teaching, Study, Dissemination, and Wider Appreciation for International Law, and Independent Audit Advisory Committee. Moreover, one high-level committee on South-South cooperation is working actively along the aforementioned committees. There is one executive committee which is known as Executive Committee of High Commissioners Program. In addition to the above-mentioned committees, there are 4 special committees are playing their dynamic role in the General Assembly, which are Special Committee on Peacekeeping Operations, Special Committees on the Charter of the United Nations, and on the strengthening of the rule of the organization, Special Committee on the situation with regard to implementation of the Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and people, and Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories. An interesting feature of the discussion is the General Assembly is that various groups have emerged which act in concern with voting on international problems. There was Soviet bloc, there is the Afro-Asian group, then the American sphere of influences and a bloc of Latin American influences, which influence the discussion of General Assembly in a very important manner. In the matter of nominations to the various committees and organs, however, these blocs do achieve a certain amount of distinction uniformity. The membership is usually divided among different regions. Since the General Assembly is the assembly of equal and sovereign nations, such interplay of politicians is perhaps essential, but many observers have felt the need of some rational basis of voting procedure. Either all the decisions should be made by a majority vote or perhaps on the basis of the population, but these questions are so far only academic in nature, and only slowly and gradually will any pattern for the future of the United Nations itself emerge. The General Assembly has various important roles to play. In each session, the Assembly elected its president, who is in a strategic position and can very well direct the deliberations of the Assembly. Besides, there is an informal side of the influence of the President of the Assembly. If he has sufficient international stature, he could bring the weight of his personality to bear on the deliberations and even on the decisions of the General Assembly. The Assembly acts as a supervisory body to all the United Nations bodies. Apart from the formulation of the policy recommendations, the General Assembly can regulate the budget of United Nations according to the provision of Article 17 and the rules of procedures. The Assembly has created a committee on contribution which assesses the contribution to the United Nations budget by various member states. The General Assembly can recommend any amendment to the Charter, and it decides the question of admission of new members. It also elects the non-permanent members of the Security Council. So, I discussed the second organs of the United Nations, that is called the Economic and Social Council. International economic and social cooperation starting during the First World War. But the League of Nations could not take effective steps to coordinate the work of various bodies working for economic and social cooperation among the nations. World War II brought further cooperation in this field, and during the war, the United Nations Conference on Food and Agriculture was convened in May 1943. By 1944, the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, International Monetary Fund, and International Bank for Reconstruction and Development have been established. At the time of signing of the Charter of the United Nations by its members, there were therefore quite a few organizations devoted to the work in the field of economic and social cooperation. The Economic and Social Council of the United Nations has 54 members elected by the General Assembly. 9 members are elected each year for a 3-year term. There is no permanent membership, though in practice the 5 permanent members of the Security Council are always elected. It operates under the authority of the General Assembly. The Council carries out its activities by conducting studies in the economic development of underdeveloped countries and also on the specific products and processes. The Council can make a recommendation to the member states and call either for specific legislative action or action through the organized efforts of international agencies. Various conferences are held from time to time. Its subsidiary bodies are the functional commissions, regional commissions, standing commissions, ad hoc committees, ad hoc bodies, expert bodies composed of governmental expert body composed of members serving in their personal capacity and view other related bodies, population awards, International Narcotics Control Board, Population Awards, and the Executive Board of the International Research and Training Institution for the Advancement of Women. The most striking example of help extended to the member states by the Economic and Social Council is Technical Assistance Program, initiated in 1947 to aid the underdeveloped countries. A Technical Assistance Committee determines questions of policy and a Technical Assistance Board executes this policy. This board has done excellent work, and special fund for the development of underdeveloped territories was established in 1958. Another important task assigned to the Economic and Social Council is the coordination of the work of various specialized agencies of the United Nations, like the International Labour Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the International Monetary Fund, etc. The Council has various commissions on transport, human rights, the status of women, populations, etc., who work it coordinates. These commissions are functions in nature, and they have been doing very useful work in their respective fields. These commissions collect statistics and formulate policies. Then there are regional commissions which consider the questions of particular interest to the various regions. In short, the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations is a coordinating agency under which work various commissions and specialized agencies. It is the United Nations platform for the dealing of the economic and social issues across the globe. Its all meetings are open to the member states, United Nations agencies, funds and programs, and the civil society. After the Security Council and the General Assembly, it is perhaps the most important organization of the United Nations, and in terms of concrete achievement, it is perhaps the most effective. Now, I discuss what is the Trusteeship Council. Trusteeship means the assuming of responsibility by a state for the government of a territory, whose people have not yet developed to the state necessary for the independence or self-government. The Trusteeship Council of the United Nations deal with these territories. The members of the councils are those states which are administrating trust territory. The permanent members of the Security Council, besides other non-administering member states, are given a participation for a 3-year term, elected by the General Assembly. This council functions under the authority of the General Assembly and assists the Security Council. For strategic areas, it works under the Security Council, and for non-strategic areas, on active guidance from the General Assembly. But in practice, these two things are regarded as identical. The Council considers the report submitted by the administering authority on the basis of the questionnaire, and then reports either to the General Assembly or the Security Council, making recommendations. This council has various standing committees and ad hoc committees, where again the equality of representation between the administering and non-administrating state has been established. As a trusteeship council is entrusted with the promotion of economic, social, and educational advancement of the inhabitants of the states placed under trust, and to encourage responsibility for human rights and fundamental freedom. Its work is really important. Now, what is International Court of Justice? The International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. It was established in June 1945 by the Charter of the United Nations and began work in April 1946. Its statute forms an integral part of the Charter. All the members of the United Nations are is pro facto parties to the statute. The court consists of 15 judges elected by the Security Council and the General Assembly. President and vice presidents of the court are elected by the members of the courts from among themselves. The judges are elected regardless of their nationality from among the persons of high moral character possessing the highest judicial qualifications. They are elected for 9 years and are eligible for re-election. They cannot exercise any political or administrative functions or engage in any other occupation of professional nature. According to Article 31 of the Statute of International Court of Justice, each party to the dispute has a right to choose its own nominee to sit as a judge of the court. The permanent seat of the court is at The Hague, but the court can sit elsewhere when it considers desirable. The court remains permanently in session except during the judicial vacations. The court has a jurisdiction. It decides in accordance with the international law. Disputes of a legal nature that are submitted to it by the member states. And it gives advisory opinion on legal questions at the request of the organs of the United Nations or specialized agencies authorized to make such a request. The court exercises jurisdiction over states which are parties to the statute and over other states who deposit a declaration signifying their acceptance of the court's jurisdiction and undertaking to comply with the court's decision. The jurisdiction of the court is of three kinds: voluntary, number 2 optional, compulsory or obligatory, number 3 advisory. As far as voluntary jurisdiction, its domain comprises all cases which the parties refers to the court by agreement. The jurisdiction of the court is compulsory in all legal disputes concerning the interpretation of a treaty, number 2 any questions of international law, number 3 the existence of any fact which, if established, would constitute a breach of an international obligation, and number 4 the nature and extent of the reparation to be made for the breach of an international obligation. States cannot be compelled to refer their dispute to the court. The jurisdiction of the court is confined to the cases which are voluntarily submitted to it, except where one of the parties to the dispute has bound itself in advance to accept the jurisdiction of the court. But opinion says that apart from the reservation, there is probably no dispute which does not come within the purview of 4 categories enumerated above. Under the advisory jurisdiction, the court can give its advice on many legal points referred to it by the Security Council, General Assembly, or other organs of the UN. Such advisory opinions are not binding upon the parties unless the states are bound by agreement in advance to accept the verdict of the court as binding. Article 38 of the statute provides that the court shall decide the cases in accordance with international law and shall apply international conventions, international customs, recognized principle of law, and judicial decision of the highly qualified publicists of various nations. Cases are brought before the court either by a notification of the special agreement or by a written application addressed to the registrar. The full court sits for the decision unless provided otherwise. Decisions are taken by majority vote. In case of a tie, the president has a casting vote. The judgment is final and without appeal. In short, the court acts as a world court while having its roots in a Hague Peace Conference and the Permanent Court of Arbitrations of 1899 and the Permanent Court of International Justice of 1922. Now I discuss the Secretariat. The Secretariat of the United Nations comprises a Secretary General and a staff of international civil servants. It carries out the day-to-day activities of the United Nations, arrange the holding of the sessions, corresponds with the members' nations, and undertake the specific jobs of the international diplomacy and contact. The Secretary General is the Chief Administrative Officer of the organization. Among its chief duties is that of ensuring the efficient working of the meeting of the organs and committees and conferences. He draws a provisional agenda notify the member states, provide staff and facilities, undertake studies, advises on matters of procedure, and assist in preparing the documents, resolutions, and reports. Another important duty of the Secretary General is to coordinate and integrate the programs of various branches of the Secretariat and the specialized agencies. The Secretary General is responsible for the preparation of the annual budget of the United Nations, which is submitted to the Advisory Committee on the Budgetary Questions and the Fifth Committee, and ultimately to the General Assembly. He is the custodian of all UN funds, and he has a responsibility for their efficient disbursement. Another function of the Secretary General is to submit an annual report on the work of the United Nations, which in fact is a comprehensive summary of the work undertaken and is very valuable as a source of information. In practice, these reports deal with the burning issues of the day and occasionally contain suggestions and proposals related to the political questions. The Secretary General has the power to bring matters to the attention of the UN organs and to make investigations and inquiries on his own initiative. The Secretary General can therefore exercise considerable political influences. Apart from this, in case of dispute between nations, the UN Security Council has been sending the Secretary General for conciliatory efforts, as happened during the Indo-Pak War and Lebanon. The conduct of the international civil servants working in the Secretariat is governed by staff regulations and rules, and there are two main principles guiding recruitment. Number one, personal qualification of the personnel, and number two, the securing of adequate geographical representation. There is a joint disciplinary committee which work under the Secretary General as an advisory body, and there is also a joint appeal board with 3 members. The Secretary General is not bound to accept its recommendations. There is a provision for further appeals regarding serving matter to the United Nations Administrative Tribunal. The United Nations, while having its headquarters in New York, is maintaining actively its significance in several other countries like Addis Ababa, Bangkok, Beirut, Geneva, etc. In order to maintain international peace, there are 16 United Nations peace operations are going on in different parts of the world. Now I discuss what are the specialized agencies of the United Nations. We will now consider some of the major agencies working within the framework of the United Nations, known as specialized agencies. These agencies are devoted to the work of economic development and social and cultural betterment of the people of the world. They have achieved considerable measure of success in their respective fields, and a brief view of some of the most important of these agencies will be helpful in arriving at a broad view of magnitude of efforts being made in this field. The first special agency of the UN is International Monetary Fund, and International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The International Monetary Fund has been established to promote international monetary cooperation and to facilitate the expansion and balanced growth of member nations. Its most important function is the promotion of the exchange stability and assistance to the member nations in correcting their balance of payment position. Primarily, it works to foster the global growth and economic stability and financial development in the world. It has 188 member states, and each member of IMF is assigned of contribution. And the voting authority is in direct proportion to the monetary contribution that the particular member nation makes. Certain conditions have been laid down by the funds regulating the access to the fund. The members are required not to alter the rates more than 10% from their initial par value without the fund's permission. And a certain percentage of the global value of the contribution to the fund must be maintained. If members purchase any currencies from the fund, they use it only for the purposes approved by the fund. It has often happened that a member nation, when facing difficulty in the balance of the payments, has drawn upon the resources of the monetary fund in order to stabilize its currency. It is a very useful institution. IMF is also providing policy advising along with the financial supporting to its members in economic difficulties and helping the developing countries for the achievement of the microeconomic stability and for the reduction of poverty. Now I discuss IBR. The main function of IBR are promotion of private foreign investment and strengthening of long-range balanced growth of the international trade. It provides loan to the member nations and supplements private investment by providing financing for producing purposes. The bank builds up its own function by the contributions from government and by raising of funds in the investment market. In its turn, the bank gives loan to the member countries either directly or to the private business companies which invest in that country under suitable guarantees. Moreover, the bank provides low-interest loan, interest-free credit and grants to the developing countries for the economic and social development. Like the monetary fund, a board of executive director under the board of governors manages it. These two useful agencies have helped particularly the underdeveloped countries in large measures. The International Bank in particular has been instrumental in providing funds for investment in industrial and agricultural projects in many Asian and African developing countries. Now I discuss what is International Labour Organization. The International Labour Organization dates back to pre-World War I era. But after the establishment of United Nations, its activities have embraced a larger sphere. It works for organization and welfare of the labor force in the world. Through various conventions, it has worked for the recognitions by world governments of the rights of the labor in matters of safety, continuing of employment, health, and social security. It promotes legislations guaranteeing the minimum civilized condition for labor, and it has undertaken special measures for the protection of women workers and children. Now I discuss United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. This agency started with the realization of the Allied nation to rebuild the war-damaged education facilities. In 1945, its constitution was adopted, which has the famous phrase in its preamble, "Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of the peace must be constructed." The general purposes of United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization are to promote collaboration among the nations through education, science and culture, in order to promote universal respect for justice, the rule of law and human rights. Membership is open to all the members of United Nations who ratify its constitution, and even to non-member states recommended by executive board and approved by a two-thirds majority. It has an organ called General Conference, under which there is an executive board and secretariat. Under the secretariat, there are various departments dealing with specialized subjects. Now, I tell you about World Health Organization. In 1945, preliminary conference for the establishment of United Nations also called for a special conference to plan a new health organization. In 1946, under the United Nations Economic and Social Council, a technical committee of health experts from 16 countries was formed. The International Health Conference was called in June and in July 1966. This conference decided to continue the pre-war activities and to put greater emphasis on research and technical assistance. Like the ILO, WHO work through the procedure of conventions. The structure of this organization is similar to that of UNESCO. It is a health organization under which work an executive board. The main executive work is done by Director General, under whose there are offices and departments and divisions relating to the various regions of the world, and a specialized subject of study and research. The Assembly meets annually and decides important questions, including the adoption of conventions by a two-thirds majority. Convention are the recommendations an international agency makes, and these are ratified by the member states, after which they become binding. Now I discuss the last special agencies, that is called Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. The The FAO of United Nations, like other such agencies, is an extension of the efforts being made under the old League of Nations. Its purposes are to improve the efficiency of agricultural production and distribution, and to raise the level of nutrition and standards of living. Its structure is also similar to that of other organizations. There is the General Conference, under which there is a Council and Director General. It has special committees on different aspects of its work and program operations in various fields. The FAO undertakes research and assistance to member nations in evolving their own program for the increase of agricultural production. Now, I tell you what is the United Nations and international security. What is the role of United Nations in international security? The United Nations was conceived as an organization for international security mainly by the Western Allies in World War II. And one of the main ingredients of international security was the continuous unity and harmony between the superpowers of the world. But almost immediately after the war, the harmony of action disappeared and a cold war started between the communists and the non-communists. The situation became still more complicated with the rise of small nations who won their freedom from their erstwhile colonial masters. And the two powers blocs tried to get the allegiance of the young rising nations. The power structure itself underwent two significant changes. Britain and France no longer remained great powers. The USSR and the United States were the two superpowers which came to dominate the world politics. The emergence of China as nuclear power in 1964 considerably shocked both the superpowers, and the world entered in a phase where the two phases were beginning to see the emergence of a third power. In the United Nations, during the first 9 or 10 years of its existence, quite a few international disputes were rather successfully dealt with in spite of the bitter debates and the play of the power policies. The Iranian complaint against the Soviet Union for interference was amicably settled. And when the question of Greece came up before the Security Council, and the Security Council could not decide upon the final measures for securing peace, the role of General Assembly became more prominent. I will be telling you remaining about this topic in next video, so please subscribe my channel and also press bell icon and like this video.